The Assembly Committee on Government Affairs will come to order. Madam Secretary, please call roll.
Assemblywoman Anderson. Assemblywoman Black. Assemblywoman Brown May. Assemblywoman Considine. Assemblywoman Dickman. Assemblywoman Duran. Assemblyman Ellison. Assemblywoman Martinez. Assemblyman Matthews. Assemblyman MacArthur. Assemblywoman Thomas. Assemblywoman Torres. Chair Flores.
Present. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please let the record reflect all members are present and we have a quorum. Good morning, members. Thank you. Responded and everything. Okay. Members, as you all know, this week is going to be slightly hectic, so just be prepared for weird hours in case we have to do last-minute adjustments, specifically for Friday. I wanted everybody to have a heads up. We may have to go into a small recess and then come back in the afternoon, so please just be prepared to be here all Friday, especially those of you who were thinking of maybe getting an early flight. Please make sure you don't do that, as we may need you. On today's agenda, we have Senate Bill 349, and I wasn't hinting you, Assemblywoman Black, but I might have been hinting you. But no, in all seriousness, members, I just want to make sure everybody's here, and I don't want anybody to be caught off guard. On today's agenda, we have Senate Bill 349. I anticipate a lot of folk wanting to engage in the conversation, both in support, opposition, and a neutral position. For the sake of fairness, we'll allocate 30 minutes for each. We won't limit any single speaker. What that means is if there's an individual that takes up 30 minutes of support and makes it difficult for everybody else to participate, then so be it. Same is true for opposition and neutral. I suggest that the support, opposition, and neutral, you speak to one another so that you can coordinate who's going to say what, and that you don't repeat yourselves and take away the opportunity from others from engaging. And then beyond that, members, I just want to remind you that if you are logged into Zoom, please make sure you log off. If you're in the committee room, you should not be logged into Zoom, making poor IT's life impossible. With that, for those of you wishing to participate, please make sure you state your name for the record after each question, and that you spell it the very first time so that our folk that are working behind the scenes can follow along. With that, we'll go ahead and open up the hearing on Senate Bill 349. For those of you wishing to participate in public comment, we'll be doing that at the very end of today's meeting. Good morning, Senator Orenshaw. Whenever you're ready.
Good morning, Senator Flores, members of the Assembly Government Affairs Committee. For the record, James Orenshaw, represent State Senate District 21. First time before this committee this session. Really honor, pleasure to be here, and I appreciate your hearing Senate Bill 349. Have you thought about what you might have for lunch today? Maybe an orange would be good, maybe an apple. And delicious, healthy. We want our constituents, our families to eat more healthy food like this. But one thing I've noticed is that when healthy food like this is eaten, we have an orange peel, we have an apple core. And quite often, it's distressing to me when it ends up in a landfill. The goal of Senate Bill 349 is to enable local governments to establish community composting. This happens in other parts of the country where people can take food scraps, they can be composted, and then they can be used as fertilizer for community gardens, for agriculture, for horticulture, and that's especially important in the southern part of the state because our soils are so challenging. So before I take any more of your time, I'd like to kind of go over the roadmap of who will be with me today, because I've got some really tremendous experts who can speak to the bill. And then with your permission, I'd be happy to answer any questions. But I'd like to first turn it over to my colleague, Senator Fabian Doñate, who represents the district next door to me and who was instrumental in the amendment to this bill over in the Senate. Then I would like to turn it over to either on Zoom or phone, Dr. Larry Green, who is an expert in composting. He's an MD and a PhD. He's a scientist. Then I've got another scientist and a horticulturist, Dr. Angela O'Callahan, who should be on Zoom from Southern Nevada. Here in Carson City, I have Michael DeLee, who is a farmer and an attorney, former classmate of mine at Boyd Law School, and very interested in this bill. And then with your permission, Chair, I'd like to turn it over to Tara Pike down in Southern Nevada, Lisa Ortega, and Mark Rubin. So with your permission, Chair, I'd like to turn it over to Senator Doñate, and I'll stand by to answer any questions after the presenters are done.
Thank you. Good morning, Senator Doñate. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Flores. Buenos dias. Good morning to the members of the Assembly Committee on Governmental Affairs. My name is Fabian Doñate, and I represent Senate District 10 in Clark County. I'm here today to urge your support in Senate Bill 349 and to give you a quick context for the work that was already completed on the Senate side. As the chair of the Senate Committee on Natural Resources, I worked with Senator Orenthal to get this legislation to a good spot. Many of the concerns that we heard on the Senate side relied upon the reference to fee increases, upending contractual agreements, and changing the definition of what constituted as waste. We added provisions to prevent many of these concerns, which are reflected on the first reprint of this bill. And in addition, rather than making this legislation a mandate, we allowed local jurisdictions and counties with the opportunity to pursue what would be considered as a composting zone. If a city or county officials desire to make a particular open space into an urban gardening or a composting designated area for the local neighborhood to share plots of land, they would have the power to do so. You may hear statements today that part of this legislation is not necessary, or that local jurisdictions may already have the power to do this, but I challenge that statement by pointing to a real-life example with regards to how we approach recycling. There's an uncertainty that lies between the differential powers observed by a city and their respective county government, which could potentially create a conflict. I worked with my legal counsel to address these concerns, and that is what's reflected on the first reprint. And passing this legislation codifies in statute that we want to encourage local composting and support a pathway to urban gardening. Today, Nevada is listed as one of the worst states suffering from food insecurity, and we know that this systemic problem has been intensified with the COVID-19 pandemic. In Clark County, many of my constituents are forced to live in situations known as either food deserts or food swamps, terms utilized to signify a limited access of a variety of healthy foods. And given my public health background, I believe it is safe to say that our families deserve access to locally grown healthy foods, and SB 349 is a first step to accomplishing that. So thank you, and I'll turn it back to the presenters.
And thank you for joining us, Senator. And also, I'll say publicly that I know you've worked very hard on this bill, so thank you for working alongside Senator Orenthal.
Chair, with your permission, I believe we have Dr. Larry Green either on Zoom or on the telephone, and he does have a presentation.
Thank you. Dr. Green, do we have you?
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm sorry, the video camera I have seems to be defective. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I want to start out by first thanking you for the opportunity to speak. And I am volunteering the information that I have based on 40 years of research. I have an MD and a PhD, and I've been involved in the bioscience sector for well over 50 years. So I really want to address the whole issue of waste and waste management. And I'm very open to questions offline as well. You may want to get a hold of me later if you have some questions, but I want to focus on some basic issues starting right out. The term compost, as it's commonly used by most people, is sort of a generic term that suggests that you're taking food waste or green waste and breaking it down into something that's useful, ultimately probably going to end up in the soil. If you want to know how much food waste is being generated, there's a very simple formula. There's 1 pound per person per day every place in the world. So that's such a simple formula that's so well established that you can take any city or any town, whether it's urban, rural, or wherever you are, if you know the population, you can calculate how many pounds, tons per day are going to be generated, and we are drowning in food waste. Now, we really shouldn't call it waste because food scraps or the waste material that ends up in a garbage can might get sent to a landfill, it might be sent to an anaerobic digester, it might be a large commercial composter operation. But it turns out that that food material can be used in local composting called bokashi or bokashi fermenting. And you all know what fermenting is because you're probably familiar with yogurt, sourdough bread. Maybe some of you know a little bit about kimchi. But the only difference between traditional composting and bokashi primarily is it occurring with or without oxygen? And that turns out to be extremely interesting and very important, and it's really quite exciting because most people in the United States, until I would say the last few years, weren't really aware that there's an alternative to oxidation, which is what composting is. And composting is actually difficult to do. You have to be the traditional composting is difficult because you have a carbon nitrogen ratio that has to be set fairly close to a proper ratio. The humidity is important, and then it heats up in a pile. And everyone who's tried to do composting knows that it's a little bit difficult. Now, professionals can do it, but it takes a lot of space and a lot of equipment, and it costs a lot of money to do it. And at the end of the process, if you observe what happened, your pile has shrunk down by about 50%. And the reason for that is because during oxidation, and the organisms that are involved in that process, heating up the pile, are driving water vapor, nitrogen, carbon in the form of carbon dioxide, and many other pollutants into the atmosphere. And so what you're ending up with is a pile of material that we call compost, but there's a very interesting thing about it. Because it heated up, most of the microflora, including beneficial microflora that might have been present and helped for the soil, have been destroyed. Now, what I'm interested in is bringing the soil back to life, and I'm also interested in handling our waste in a much more efficient way. And it turns out that if you do the same process using microflora and fungi that are derived from the soil as the material that's going to cause the fermentation, and you exclude oxygen, the process is extremely efficient. It only takes 2 weeks. And in that 2-week period, you have no oxidation, no gases being formed. There's hardly any measurable carbon dioxide. There's no methane. There's no nitrogen gas escaping. And it may seem trivial, but water is important too. And 100% of the water is retained. So when you, I'm going to call it pickling your food waste, because that's what you're really doing. When you do this pickling process, fermentation process, you end up with something that weighs virtually the same as what you started with. There's no loss of weight. So you have literally twice as much mass of material to return to the soil. But the other exciting thing about the fermentation is it kills pathogens. It kills salmonella, listeria, E. coli in a matter of less than 48 hours from the start. It only takes 2 weeks to get to the end point. So you have a very fast turnover of a high-value product that you end up with that can go back to the soil. And in that process, you've increased the population of diverse, very beneficial microflora that live in the soil, which are normally starving all the time. And because there's so many of these organisms going back into the soil, and they have water retained within their cellular structure, you're actually increasing the water content of the soil as well. There's one other interesting thing that's happening with fermentation, what we call bokashi, which is a Japanese word that means fermented organic material. The other interesting thing that's happening is in the fermentation process, you're building extremely valuable small molecules, some of them large molecules, that are beneficial to plants. For example, humic acid, fulvic acid, a number of plant hormones called auxin, which help plants grow more efficiently, and gibberellins, which are complex molecules that actually increase the productivity of plants. They increase the yields. and they increase the architectural structure of the plant, making it healthier. And the other benefit when you take that fermented material and return it to the soil is that it excludes the open spaces where opportunistic organisms can get in and do crop damage or damage to your vegetable garden or your fruit trees or whatever you have. So what I'm really saying here is that although you might call it composting, and it is by sort of the layman's definition, composting your food waste, it's not the same as the oxidized material that you see normally when people talk about composting. And you get much more value back into your soil. And it's my experience that around the world, many people are doing this all the time, every day. They've learned that this is a better way to treat the soil and bring it back to life. And that's the other thing to remember. Soil is a living thing. So you can improve your soil content very rapidly, literally overnight. Once you start this process, you could reduce the greenhouse gas production, heat and water vapor and nitrogen and carbon dioxide all going to the atmosphere and put it back into the soil. And you attract other organisms like earthworms that make castings and all kinds of things that are living in the soil back to that soil to improve your plant performance and your yields. And this is something that doesn't cost much at all. In fact, it's extremely inexpensive. It only takes the culture media and a container that excludes the oxygen. And the footprint of the process is very small compared to composting, which takes up a lot of land. So it's ideal. It's almost perfect for families, home growers, or small communities that might have a pea pod garden. And they can take that waste that comes out of their garden that isn't good enough. Maybe it's rotted, it was left too long. They can take that and cycle it right back into the soil. So what you're really doing is you're closing the loop from the farm to the client or the food consumer. And then normally what's happening after that is the food waste ends up going to a landfill, going to animal digestion, or going to a compost facility. Most people just don't know that there is this other alternative, and it's very easy to do. And you don't have to be very smart about it. The microbes know what to do. They're hungry. And the way you're doing this process, I'm just going to say one more bit. I know the time is precious, but about how the mechanism works. It's pretty fascinating. As the material is fermenting or pickling, it's actually consuming the sugars and forming small acids. They're called carboxylic acids. And these carboxylic acids are they're making the pH go lower, making the material more acid. And they drop that pH down to about 4.5. Now, the reason they do that is because most of food waste is a substance called cellulose. It's hard to break down. But the ideal enzymatic activity, the peak activity, is right around pH 4.5. So when you do this process, what you're really doing is mimicking nature. This is what evolved over millions of years. And it's the most ideal way to keep the soil healthy. So the last thing I'll say for the moment is that if you were going to walk into a jungle or a forest anywhere, you won't find any rotting, stinking odor. You won't find piles of material with rats digging into it. You won't find coliforms and salmonella and listeria brooding on the surface or festering in the water supply. When you ferment and you do it the way nature does it, you actually destroy those organisms because they can't survive. They can't compete in that environment where the acid is higher and there's no oxygen. You do get that problem when you do compost, and that's one of the serious problems of composting is you have to check that over. I guess the other thing that I would say is that there are some environmental impacts that we can just summarize with, and I'm going to just drop through them a little bit. And the first one I'm going to talk about is the air quality. I just mentioned that with fermenting, you don't produce noxious gases, you don't heat up the atmosphere, and you don't lose water into the atmosphere, and you don't get that rotting putrefaction odor that comes around from compost sites in general. Now, what about water conservation? It is important, maybe not in some areas, but in many areas in the southeast and southwest, the cost to a grower is very high to get water. And if you can put water back into the soil that came from the food waste, and you can do it locally, that's fantastic. But what about that water quality? If you take a lot of water, it's contaminated with chemicals, pesticides, fertilizers, and other things that are problematic. But when you recycle with fermenting, you don't have to use any pesticides. You don't have to use any chemical fertilizers. It's the natural recycling of the trace elements, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and all the other materials, plus the beneficial microbes that are giving you value. And as far as that goes, what you've just done there is you've minimized the demand for using fertilizers derived from petroleum. And those fertilizers don't stay in the soil. Normally, they'll just run right with the water once you put them in. They're not very stable. But in the fermenting process, when you produce the microflora that are beneficial and all these other plant hormones that have a relationship with the plant roots and feed the plants, you maintain the material in the soil. It doesn't run off. And then there's an issue of if you have to transport things, carry things, the one thing I would say there is I don't think any amateur or any person should be moving food waste around large quantities of food waste because it is dangerous. It actually is always contaminated with potential toxic pathogens. But if you're putting it in a local garden and you're just fermenting it right at your home or right in the area where your garden is, it's very safe, it's easy to do, and you're not going to miss. As long as you put the oxygen out of the system, you're going to get what you want. So what we're doing here is we're using the land much more efficiently when we return the waste to the land that's been fertilized and fermented on that land, and we are minimizing our consumption of water and we'll actually reducing the air pollution and the heating up of the atmosphere. So soil fertility is being returned, the soil is alive, and I think it's an ideal way to process material. And I can just tell you from my own experience all around the world, and I've got people from Iceland to Australia, all across Canada and the U.S., and even parts of Europe and Africa that are doing this process, and that's what I've been involved in for many years now, teaching people the process and showing them how easy it is and getting the research behind it that supports it and documents it. And we have lots of data on that. So I'll stop at this point and open it up for any questions. I know I ran through a lot of material there, but the bottom line to remember is that traditional composting involves oxidation, and it produces a very different process. It results in a loss of mass. It reduces a lot of the material that's valuable that could have gone right into the ground, and it's not something that a normal person can do easily. On the other hand, bokashi, which is called acidic anaerobic fermentation, can be done by anyone very simply. They don't require a lot of training or a lot of equipment. It's very cost effective and it's fast. So let's leave it at that point. There's a lot of material to cover, and I want the others to have a chance to make their discussion as well, and I'm more than happy to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Green. We'll continue down here with Senator Orenshaw so that we can continue the presentation, because I know you have at least one more speaker. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Dr. Angelo Callahan is on Zoom, and then on Zoom we also have Tara Pike, Lisa Ortega, and then here in Carson City, Michael DeLee. I believe Dr. O'Callahan hopefully is on Zoom, and thank you, Dr. Green, for all that tremendous information.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am Dr. Angela O'Callahan, and I really appreciate being asked to speak in favor of, to support this really important bill. I'm Dr. Angela O'Callahan. I'm an associate professor and the social horticulture specialist for Nevada. My doctorate is in horticulture, and my areas of expertise include, I have the Master Gardener program of Southern Nevada, youth horticulture, which teaches children from pre-K to post-high school, and community horticulture education, which covers teaching individual people who want to grow plants. I'm also involved in training regional landscape professionals in pesticide safety. I also teach, among other things, composting for residents, for local people who are trying to simply do something about the garbage that they don't want to be putting out there that maybe actually could be used. Many local gardeners had been told that composting is impossible here in Nevada. And of course, that's obviously not true. But I was also told when I first arrived here, which is now 20 years ago, I was told that, well, you can't grow vegetables in Nevada. Imagine my surprise. But I've lived here, as I said, over 20 years. And over those 20 years, I have seen the interest in urban agriculture and urban horticulture it's expanded so much. And that's despite the fact that we do live in the smallest, driest desert in North America. Now, I'm located in southern Nevada. And anybody who has ever tried to dig a hole in the ground in southern Nevada knows that our soils tend to be significantly less than fertile. But we can improve them. And we can improve them by adding the organic matter that is the end product of any composting program, whether it be anaerobic fermentation or aerobic composting. Whichever way, the end product is something that is going to improve our soils. And this is really important because when we improve our soils, we are also improving their water holding capacity and their drainage. You may or may not be familiar with the idea that the number one reason that plants die anywhere, not just in Nevada, but anywhere, is because of a lack of drainage. Our soils tend to have a little bit of nasty dirt and then a big, hard, rocky portion underneath. Well, improving the soil actually helps to break down a lot of the stuff that we would otherwise be trying to deal with. But it also helps with water holding capacity so that we can irrigate somewhat less if we have enough water being held in the soil, but not so much that we're flooding plants. It's a perfect balance that it's provided by adding organic matter. And when I say organic matter, I mean the end product of any composting, aerobic or anaerobic. Okay. Now, when you think about it, technically we've been in a drought for 20 years, at least in southern Nevada. And this was information that I got from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. And they said, yeah, 20 years you've been in a drought. That's a lot. And we need to hold on to whatever water we can get. Okay, now, as I said, our soils are at best problematic and at worst almost impossible. So growing food is not something that we can do easily here, but we can do it. And we can do it using the materials that we already have and that we generate on a daily basis. We're a state with about 3 million people. And Dr. Green just stated 1 pound of waste per person per day. Well, that's a lot of garbage. That's a lot of stuff that can be ultimately degraded into something that is going to improve our soils. So if this bill passes, it is going to be a major benefit for all of us who are interested in local food production and in improving the nutritional status of our population. We have elderly people who are living in food deserts. We have children who are living in food deserts, but we also are able to improve their access to food by locally grown foods. And this is not going to be a huge program. If this bill passes, it's going to be a wonderful demonstration of what can be done for people living in a desert. We have enough materials that get generated that can be broken down, and from there, those materials can be used to improve the soils in local farms, and we do have some even here in southern Nevada. So local farms can also have their soils improved, but also some of those materials can also be used in community gardens, because as I said, there's a lot of interest in urban agriculture. And according to some experts, they're looking at the expansion of community gardens, and we have over 80 of them here just in the Las Vegas area. So we have community gardens that we can actually improve the growing of food for people who are senior citizens and children. We have, as I said, we have about 80 community gardens. There are over 100 school gardens, and everybody needs to eat, and there's so many people interested in growing their own food. So why not use something that is free, that is not going to stink? Because as this process that Dr. Green was describing, it's enclosed. So it is an enclosed system, nothing is escaping, including smells. which is something that some people are concerned about whenever they hear composting. The first thing is, oh, no composting because of the stench. No, not if it's oxidized properly. But then again, in an enclosed system, there's absolutely no potential for stench because you have that stuff in a container. It's enclosed. And until it's finished, until that whole process is done, it's not opened. And when that process is finished, no stench. So it's a very big deal. And the fact that local governments they have control over this process in this bill. So it's not going to be taking any of the authority from local governments, but it is going to be giving them the green light for improving what they already want to do. So making this an important part of our horticulture/agricultural efforts for Nevada. We want to be more self-supporting in terms of our food production. This is a really important way that we can do it. And that's all the time I'm going to take. And thank you very much for listening.
And thank you for joining us this morning. Senator, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. O'Callahan. Really, really pleasure to have you here. Next, Chair, I believe we have Tara Pike on Zoom and Lisa Ortega, whoever, I think I see Miss Pike. Tara Pike, thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Let me make sure. Okay.
Yeah, you're fine.
Yes, we can.
My name is Tara Pike. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. I am the sustainability coordinator for UNLV, and I am also the founder or creator or starter of the UNLV recycling program. I started that back in 1995. And it was at a time when there wasn't a lot of recycling happening in Las Vegas. There was some, but not to the level we have today, which is impressive in my opinion. And so when I talk about or think about organic waste, I'm always looking at it from the perspective of keeping the material out of the landfill and getting it back into beneficial use. And with organic waste, it's always been a passion of mine to keep that material out of the landfill. I've been composting in my backyard for at least 15 years. Currently, I have a large composting system in which I use a tractor. I have 2.5 acres and I have some animals, so I like to compost their manure. And I only at my house am able to compost what I generate at my house. That is something that is I don't know if it's a law or it's what the health district told me, is that you, as a person composting in my backyard, I cannot accept waste from any other people, neighbors, friends, nobody. It has to just be what I generate on my property. I also have an in-vessel composter at UNLV. And again, same situation. I can only accept or compost in that unit what is generated at UNLV. And that's fine. I'm not complaining about that in any way, shape, or form. I'm glad to have the opportunity to be able to compost at UNLV and at my home. But I think when you talk about other communities at similar size or smaller to Las Vegas or Reno, they have organic waste collection, either curbside or they have drop-offs. So we can do it in Las Vegas, in Reno, in Nevada, as long as we have the laws and the ability to do it. And I do not think at this point we have that ability. And so I hope that you consider that when you're voting on this, that you're kind of opening up an opportunity for our communities to decide what they want to do with organic material. Like Bowling Green just launched a 6-month pilot program. And so pilot programs are wonderful because you can decide if it doesn't work out to end the program. And this bill would give us the opportunity, in Nevada to do something like this. But it's a 6-month pilot program where residents can drop off food waste and landscape waste. So that's a great program that has been put in place by Bowling Green. And Republic Services, adapts to laws and organic waste bans across the country. States like Connecticut, Vermont, Massachusetts, California, Rhode Island, and New York, specifically New York City, have lots of laws regarding organic waste material, keeping it out of the landfill. And these Republic Services services these areas, and they've adapted to that, and they can do that as well in Nevada. They did win the 2020 Organics Recycler of the Year Award from the National Waste Recycling Association, obviously for work they've done across the country. So I hope that they will be supportive of this in a way that helps move Las Vegas and Nevada and Reno area and other parts of our state into the 2020, so they can win in 2021 as well, because we deserve it. We deserve to be able to have residents decide what they want to do with their organic material. And I know one of the arguments that they and others will make is that, we make electricity from the methane generated at the landfill. I don't think that something like this is going to change their ability to make electricity at the landfill. There's still going to be millions of tons of organic material heading to landfills and into Apex. This is only going to probably be a tiny little chunk of organic waste that's going to get diverted as a result of this bill. But that tiny chunk makes a big difference, and it's a big deal for the people who want to participate in something like this, who want to make soil and who want to keep their food waste out of the landfill. So I think it's an important thing to provide the opportunity to our local governments to make decisions on creating programs like this for the residents. So thank you.
Thank you. Senator, please.
Thank you very much, Chair Flores. And I, again, want to salute Tara Pike, because for many years, recycling, was a challenge before we had curbside. And she started the Rebel Recycling Program at UNLV, which allowed many of us to take our recyclables down to UNLV, drop them off so that they could be recycled. And I certainly participated in that for quite a while when where I lived did not have curbside recycling in the apartment complex. And boy, just imagine how great it would be if organic material, food scraps, could also be taken to a central location like Rebel Recycling has at UNLV. So I definitely want to salute Tara Pike. Thank you, Chair. Now I'd like to see if Lisa Ortega is on Zoom.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Good morning.
Excellent. Chair Flores, members of the committee, Senator Orenthal, my name is Lisa Ortega, Lisaortega. I'm a master arborist and conservationist. I'm a member of the Sierra Club Southern Nevada Group, XCOM, and I speak today for myself. Put simply, composting is a process of recycling your unwanted organic trash and waste, turning it into a soil amendment, which can be rich in the nutrients that plants need to grow. By creating a specific area for all your organic waste to compost together, you can ensure that only usable soil is created. This waste will decompose over time and turn into compost or soil that you can use in local gardening. An urban composting zone helps neighbors in the community in a community effort toward a greater self-sufficiency when growing our own produce right in our own backyards. Nevada heat is good for compost and helps it to decompose quickly and turns trash into usable compost. Once more, our area is short on this kind of quality soil, as you've heard. The need for composting is often much higher in dry spaces. If you live in the desert, you may know how difficult it is to plant and grow certain vegetables, fruits, and flowers. Often compost that has been created
is the best and potentially the only way to make sure you're getting the nutrients to things that you want to grow and increase the chances of a beautiful garden or fruitful crop for residents in Nevada. Food scraps in the trash contribute to high concentrations of methane, which contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. With community composting opportunities, emissions can be reduced before landfill disposal. With recycle rates being low from unclean recycled materials, this endeavor will help the state with cleaner recycling minus these scraps and help the state reach its recycling trash goals. I'd like to thank the committee. I'd like to thank you all for taking one sustainable step at a time for a sustainable Nevada. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And now I believe Mark Rubin is on Zoom. I hope. And Chair, for the record, with Ms. Tara Pike, there was a kitty who I don't think put his name on the record. Co-presenting. Perhaps Mark Rubin is on the phone, Chair? If he's not here, I can turn it over to Mr. Michael DeLee, who's here in Carson City.
Please, let's do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Flores. Michael DeLee, M-I-C-H-A-E-L-D-E-L-E-E, for the record. It's a shame we didn't hear from Mark Rubin from Gilcrease Orchard in Las Vegas. There's such an icon there, and they do so much there with both composting and, of course, community gardening. So perhaps we'll hear from him at some other time. But what a great example of what you can actually do when you put your mind to it in Southern Nevada. I know our time is limited. I just wanted to briefly address a couple of points from these excellent speakers this morning. I grew up in Los Angeles in the 1970s, and it was hard to breathe. I lived through that, and it's different now. And there's a lot more people there. So we can change. We can make changes if we put our mind to it. At some point, 20, 30 years ago, people laughed when you said solar. Now look at Nevada and solar. We can make a difference. This is how it starts. And I tried to speak to many of you, and I didn't get to everybody. I apologize. But there was one thing that I did see on a board in one of your offices, and that is that you don't move mountains without earthquakes. And let this bill be that earthquake that moves us to the direction we need to go. You're going to hear that we don't need the bill. We do need the bill. We need a very loud and clear message to be sent to the community, because you're hearing from the community. You're seeing the posts from all of your constituents across the state of just how badly this is needed. So it's your voice that needs to go to the other facets of the administration, to the cities, to the counties, to our state administrators, and say, please make this happen. We're not telling them you have to do it. It's a permissive bill. But we're giving the guidance based upon established science in other parts of the world and other parts of the country. So I hope that you can see the need for that. And if you actually read the text of the bill, it's very innocuous. I realize it probably didn't start out that way, and we've kind of drug along some of the opposition because of that. But it is very innocuous. It gets us to where we need to be. Specifically, composting right now is defined in the regulations, and I get that. And it's a very loose definition under NAC 444-572, and you'll hear more about that later, I'm sure. It's basically anything that breaks stuff down. Well, that's fine, but right now, there's a built-in opposition to a lot of this, the NIMBY syndrome, because of what that has represented for a lot of people. And that's why we need to send the message that there is acidic anaerobic fermentation that it's composting if you define it very broadly, but it's not if you define it as against what composting is traditionally thought of. So by writing that in as an option and something that we need to be considering for our cities and counties, and as something specifically that they should be looking at for zoning, we're leading that. We're providing the leadership that everybody is telling us to provide, and we're doing our job. Finally, what is it that you can do in a condo, an apartment, or an HOA right now to make a difference? How can you think globally and act locally? In many ways, you simply can't. But with this, you can. Because for a 5-gallon bucket, which is how you typically would do a bokashi composting method, the average homeowner, the average tenant, the average child can make a very real and local difference and can bring something to a local facility that's set up by a city or county. It can make a difference to local farms. Hopefully, we'll see some community farming bills coming through the legislature, the other half of this, but without beneficiating the soil, it's not going to get very far. So we've heard a lot about farm to table. This is table to farm. I thank you for your support.
And thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you for reaching out to the members preemptively and the conversations we had in the days prior. Senator, please.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. If Mark Rubin is on Zoom or phone, he was our last presenter I had on the list, but if he's not here, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I don't believe I see him on my end. I'm checking through our system here. Broadcast, can we double check if we have Mr. Mark Rubin on? No? Yeah, we're just getting confirmation that unfortunately he's not. I do see him registered, but unfortunately.
Thank you for checking, Chair.
I don't believe he's on. So with that, we'll go ahead and open it up for questions. Members, who likes to go first? We'll start off with Assemblyman Matthews, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator. Good to see you here this morning. My question, or I guess my concern or issue with the bill would just be, why the need for this to be addressed, at the state level and sort of the top-down approach as opposed to just allowing for this to be dealt with, locally through local ordinance, reflecting the vast array of communities that we have in the state. Just for one example, it seems this bill would define in statute, and I think for the first time, the term, composting sort of specifically and narrowly. And as we know, as with any sector or any technology, there's always innovations going on, and my thinking would be that we may want to afford more room for flexibility and that kind of innovation locally. So I guess the way of forming the question would be, what would be the problem with allowing this to simply be dealt with at the county or local level in order to allow policy to reflect the particular concerns and needs of the community? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. James Orenshaw, State Senate District 21. To you and through you, Chair, to Assemblyman Matthews. Certainly, I think if you look at our state and where we are in composting and the status quo, and you look at states across the country and where they are, and you go visit a friend in Minnesota, and Minnesota has urban community composting where you can take food scraps to a central location, and if maybe you're tired when you get off your shift and you're cooking dinner for your family and you just don't have the energy to do your own compost pile, it makes it a little easier on you. Unfortunately, I think the status quo isn't working, and it isn't helping us try to divert organic waste. I hate to call it waste, but things that could enrich our soil and help our community from going to the landfill and from being composted. This bill, Senate Bill 349, I believe it's crafted in a way which does not force any community to do anything. It is enabling language if a community chooses to pursue an urban community composting zone. And the reason behind pursuing the bokashi method, I have a little trouble pronouncing that, is that it seemed like it had the least side effects in terms of odor or any danger of bugs or mice, rats attacking the composting pile. Certainly, I think composting of all kinds is great, and I'm glad that the regulation currently allows composting of all kind. This bill, the reason I went with that method was to try to have the least impact on communities with that bokashi method. And I think that, Chair, if there's a little more maybe explanation on bokashi, if Dr. O'Callahan is still on, may I Zoom a friend? To quote your colleague over in Judiciary Committee.
Please.
Dr. O'Callahan, SOS, if you're still there. Well, maybe I could ask Mr. DeLee to come up and give a little more information on that.
Thank you, Michael DeLee, for the record. Chair to Senator Matthews. SB 349 doesn't mandate anything, and it doesn't change any definitions in code. It doesn't create any limits. It leads the way. It provides leadership to implement acidic anaerobic fermentation as a model. So in theory, yes, somebody could do traditional composting, but as noted by the facts on the ground, they're just not. And given the distance limitations that are already written into the ordinances, particularly in Clark County, it's pretty much impossible. Plus, given the reality of HOA living, apartment living, condo living, it's physically impossible. So community sites are necessary, rather than taking something all the way to the northwest side of town, in the case of Las Vegas. We have to do something about that. So there's really not a limitation, but there's still a need. There's still a need for leadership on this issue. So to simply say, well, I think we can do it now under the current paradigm, it hasn't happened. And there's a lot of built-in problems. So by sending a message with the statute the way we have it written today, I think that gets us to where we need to be. But it's not going to happen overnight, because this opens the door for cities and counties to hopefully walk through. And frankly, we're going to have this presentation again in each one of our cities and counties to try to get us there. So that's all we can hope to do. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Senator, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Brown May.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for presenting such an insightful bill. I am the sister of a farmer in Massachusetts, and I'm very familiar with farmers composting. I appreciate that this is enabling language to move into our cities and counties. And my question is relative to Section 5.5. As we get into the subs, it says here that the governing body of a city may by ordinance, so we give enabling language, but then item B says must require that promptly after any compostable materials have been sealed, must be delivered. So I'm curious to know if you can talk a little bit about who would be a holder of a certificate as an actual producer of a farm, and then person or operation certified. What would you need to do in order to be certified? Do you have any idea what that looks like, or what is the scope of that certification?
Thank you. To you and through you, Chair Flores, to Assemblywoman Brown May. Certainly the certification at NRS 576.128, that comes from Department of Agriculture, and that's a certification as actual producer of certain farm products, regulations. So it's someone who is certified in agriculture and in farming. And then the reference to 7 CFR Part 205, that is the Federal National Organic Program. So that would be someone who has that certification from the federal government as an organic grower.
Thank you. Follow up, Chair.
Follow up, please.
Thank you. So just to clarify, we're really trying to provide an opportunity for members of our broad community to be able to bring their recyclable, compostable materials to a centralized location. Once they're in a container and they've fermented for a specific amount of time and they're ready to be utilized within soils, that product must then be delivered to that authorized, certified farm or person. Is that correct?
Chair Flores, to you and through you, James Orange, Senate 21, to Assemblywoman Brown May. That's correct. And if I can tag in Mr. DeLee, I think you might have some more information too to clarify it.
Thank you. For the record, Michael DeLee. The objective of this language is to make sure that these materials just don't sit there. Because the last thing you want to do is have something that is of value go to waste. We don't want it to be waste. We want it to get into the food production cycle. That's the whole reason for doing this, is to get into our soil. And when we're talking about food production in Nevada, you need that to be You don't just produce something and then take it out to the community. You have producer certificates, Department of Agriculture, and you have the National Organics Program, which they kind of overlap a little bit, but you can have one and not the other in some cases. So we want monitoring at all levels. This is not about going around or exempting out of regulations and statutes. This is about creating an ecosystem, to use an analogy, of statutes that encourage a local food web. So we want this to get processed, the acidic aerobic fermentation, and then moved out to facilities, hopefully community gardens. We've got some other legislation that's hopefully going to make it through, SB 297, other examples of community farming bills, urban farming. And elsewhere in this, it talks about we need some zoning changes, authorizing some zoning changes for community composting. We'd like to see those same things happen for urban farming. So the purpose specifically of these two, the first in the 576, 128, is somebody that has a producer certificate, which is very easy to get. You call the Department of Agriculture, you let them know the information, I think it's $50, and they just want to get you into the system. So if there's ever a problem, they can trace it back from a farmer's market, from a store, from a restaurant, to where it was produced. Similarly with the National Organics Program, we'd like to see a little bit more of that in Nevada. Hopefully we will have that again, but there's a federal set of regulations that covers that. So if they're under each one, that's the end result. And hopefully those will be within our cities as well. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I would like to follow up on one statement that you just made. I just want to be really clear that community gardens could indeed be the recipients of these compostable materials as a certified entity to receive that.
Thank you. Absolutely. We want the community gardens to be producers and get that out to the public and into the market as much as possible to diversify our economy in that way. So that's absolutely what we intend, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Considine, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senator, and all of your presenters for bringing this bill forward and for pushing forward composting. My question is a little bit along the lines of my colleague to my right. Thank you for clarifying that an individual who wants to do their own composting is still allowed to do that. I appreciate that. But then if this bill were to go in and if a community was to follow the guidance, my questions are if somebody wants to, all of the material that would be eligible for this, if they want to keep it in a different sort of way, are they able to bring it to these community compost locations, or are they required, in order to bring it to this community compost location, to follow this fermentation process?
Chair Flores, James Orange, State Senate District 21, 2 and 3 to Assemblywoman Considine. The way I envision the bill is that people could drop off the food scraps, take the orange peel and the apple core to the community composting location, and then it turns into fertilizer that can be used by a community garden or by agricultural grower, organic grower. And for folks who just, have good intentions, I've had good intentions to start composting for years, but unfortunately I haven't started it. And that can happen, and this will be diverted from going into the landfill and, can help all of us, I think.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that clarification. I just know, following up with the senator's line, I'm thinking a lot of people might have intentions, and it might just be easier for them to have like a bucket where they throw things and then bring it weekly, as opposed to like following something that might be a little bit more complicated. So thank you.
Chair, could Mr. Lee jump in? I think maybe you can clarify things.
Please.
That's okay. Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify that there's a lot of ways that this can work. A lot of people are very busy and might not be able to bring it somewhere. The details of how it's going to work in each city and county is, of course, going to be left up to the ordinance process in each city and county. This opens the door to it, gives some broad brush strokes, outlines some very sound science that we've heard today that supports this, but every community is going to be a little bit different as to how it approaches. The most important thing that you heard, of course, was keeping it away from oxygen, keeping it sealed, because then that's going to get the fermentation process going. Otherwise, you're going to have the putrefaction process, which is something you don't want with this. So those specifics are going to have to be dealt with in the regulation process. And of course, we look forward to working at the state level, because I think it might be beneficial to take another look at some of the state regulations for this as well. We're just opening the door today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Dickman, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Senator Orenshaw. My question has to do with Section 2.3. And did I miss the explanation of the purpose of that part of the bill about the Board of Health and Regulations at farmers markets? Does that tie into the composting, or is that a separate idea?
Well, James Orchall, Senate District 21, to you and through you, Chair Flores, to Assemblywoman Dickman. In the original bill, this was to facilitate certain produce getting to market that's locally grown and to try to help local growers get produce to market and remove what I believe was a barrier. And this part, through the amendment process, is still there. And I still believe this will be a benefit to local growers to get foods to farmers markets and to be able to sell locally grown produce. And if some of the fertilizer that's made from compost from people's food scraps helps some of that grow, then that would be great. And I think if there's any additional explanation, I can ask Mr. DeLee to jump in, but that's my intent.
Thank you. For the record, Michael DeLee. I probably couldn't say anything better than a supporting letter that was introduced March 30th from the Sierra Club that goes into detail on specifically this point about some of the challenges that we're seeing in terms of requirements that what you might think of as like maybe apples or something would have to be put in packages in order to be sold at farmers markets. It seemed a little bit confusing, and I know there was some concerns about that. And Nevada has a little bit different approach to some agriculture than our neighboring states. For example, I think pistachios are considered a highly processed food in Nevada, as opposed to, say, California, where you can buy them a little more openly. So I think this encourages us to take a different look at that, particularly where you're dealing with farmers markets, which are expected to be a little more accessible.
Thank you for that. And I was hoping that's what this did, as opposed to creating more regulations when it says may adopt regulations. So thanks. I appreciate the clarification.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Dickman. James Orchall, Senate 21. And certainly in the bill where I talk about a composting zone that the city or county can establish by ordinance, I'm not talking about new zoning regulations or anything that would need to go before a zoning board, but something that they would establish through their local ordinance after public hearings.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Members, any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you again for that very thorough presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members, for your time.
And at this time, we'll go
Thank
to
you.
those wishing to testify in support of Senate Bill 349. I don't believe we have anybody present in the room, and I don't believe we have anybody via Zoom either. So we'll open it up to the phone lines. Broadcast, please.
To testify in support of Senate Bill 349, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 155, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You may begin.
Thank you, Chair Flores and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera, CHRISTI CABRERA. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for the Nevada Conservation League, and we are here in support of SB 349. The food system contributes 20 to 30% of global climate pollution, and we can reduce that pollution by expanding urban agriculture, farm-to-consumer sales, and composting. I think the bill presenters did a great job of going over all of the benefits of this bill, so I'll just say that we are in strong support, and we urge the committee's support. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Next caller in support.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 882, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits of 882, please press star 6 to unmute. Caller with the last three digits of 149. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You may begin. Caller, with the last three digits of 149. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You may begin.
Hello, my name is Jessica Clark from Starseeds Urban Farm, JESSICA-CLARK. We're an urban farm located downtown Las Vegas. We also have a food truck where we serve some of our locally grown produce in salads, sandwiches, and wraps. We currently use a compost service called Viva La Compost. They pick up our compost at a cost, our waste, which includes our waste from our growing and also our produce waste and some of our salads, our juices, to be a minimal waste, hopefully in the future, a zero waste, sustainable business. But we use this service bi-weekly where we trade 2 5-pound buckets and she hauls them to the only certified local compost in Las Vegas. And then that in turn gets sold to Star Nursery. What we'd like to have is the option to give our food waste and our production waste to a local farm that we work with instead of having it used for landscaping and Star Nursery. To have that choice would be really important to us. There's a lot of community gardens that we work with, a lot of farms that we work with, and we're trying really hard in Las Vegas to create a local sustainable food source. But currently with the regulations that we're facing, we're unable to do that. So passing this bill would mean a lot for my small business. It would mean a lot for other small businesses like Viva La Compost. And I think there's other juice bars and other places that would like the option to give the waste to a farm to create food versus, to grow palm trees or landscaping for residential neighborhoods. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. Next caller in support.
To testify in support of Senate Bill 349, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, to testify in support of Senate Bill 349, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 882, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You may begin.
Good morning. My name is Stephen Andraki. For the record, S-T-E-P-H-E-N, Andraki, A-N-D-R-A-C-K-I. I'm a medical doctor and a farmer. Thank you, Mr. Orenshaw, and all the committee members for allowing me to give testimony and support for this bill. I would like to take a little bit different approach, and this is based upon the extensive experience that I have with both farming and with medicine. I'd like to make the appeal for the health and future of the community, of the state, and of our children. Currently, in my medical practice, I'm taking care of a large population of people, including elderly people, and I'm developing an integrative medicine program that is on the forefront of becoming the way and the method we're going in the future for treating people, because we're asking for participation of the patients in the provider experience for assisting in their health. I am also a pro farmer. My wife and I produce organic produce for the Las Vegas markets and have been composting for more than 20 years. Combining this integrative medicine, which is involving people into their own health, into their own future, and into their own place in this earth that we have, the only one, that we can integrate the opportunities for people to take expression of growing and participation in growing of healthy foods. Healthy foods is a part of healthiness and for our overall health and for continuing to remain healthy. We have a lot of issues to deal with in farming, and part of that is gaining good quality organic materials. We do not add any fertilizers that are not organic. We produce worm bins, worm castings, and we also have compost piles. We do not have problems with any type of perceived contaminants. I'm well aware of microbiology and pathogens. That's not an issue. The anaerobic fermentation adds a great value to how we can grow better foods to supply the market. I think that Dr. Green gave a wonderful explanation, as well as everybody else in presenting today about the value of this. I don't know how this all comes through in the end. I know that we have to start someplace. My recommendation is to start this process for ourselves, for our health, for our children's health, and for the health of the planet. And the way to do this is to allow for this to happen and to follow things along and to continue to make things better. There's nothing that precludes from being safe, from being sanitary, and from working besides obstructions from people who have other ideas about how to envision the future of our health and of our community. I will end by saying that we take a responsibility for our own health and for the earth, and this is a wonderful place to make that by starting this process and following it along. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you for joining us. Next caller in support.
Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. At this time, we'll go to those wishing to testify in opposition to Senate Bill 349. Just writing down
Testify in opposition.
I'm sorry. I apologize for interrupting you. We'll start with first with those here in Carson City, and then we'll move back to the phone lines. I apologize, broadcast. Good morning. Welcome whenever you're ready.
Good morning, Chair Flores and members. Mackenzie Warren with McDonald Carano on behalf of CNS Waste Solutions. And forgive me, members, I did have to step out to take another meeting. I will go back and listen to the record. But a few things that I was able to catch, just a little bit curious from the business owner in Las Vegas talking about potential barriers. So we've put several hours of work into this bill, meeting with Senator Orenshaw, meeting with Senator Dignate, and we've also engaged with Southern Nevada Health District and the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection. And what we've learned is that there really aren't barriers. So we've asked the question, what is it that we can fix? What is it that needs retooling? And we're unable to drill down on the solution. And so, really our opposition centers around what was raised in the hearing on the Senate, and that it's really that the appropriate place to address this is in regulation. So I'll dig into the meat a little bit. By way of background, CNS Waste Solution is an independently owned family operation. We are the hauler and recycler out in Nye County, so that's the towns of Pahrump, Beatty, Amargosa Valley, and Inyo County. And from our perspective, a good example of why the local regs is the appropriate place to tackle this is the fact that CNS brought recycling to the towns of Pahrump, Beatty, and Amargosa before we were statutorily mandated under that population cap. We will reach that number after the census, but 10 years ago, before we were even required under NRS to recycle, we've done that. It started with one bin at Walmart that was emptied a couple times a week. Now there are bins all over Pahrump. There's one in Beatty and Amargosa, and on busy weekends, they're emptied multiple times a day. So this is a great example of how local communities can come up with solutions that work for them. But one of the real concerns for CNS, given that we are in Nye County, we don't have a health district. We do not have Southern Nevada Health District. They do not service Nye County. So who is our enforcement? Who is our regulator? Who is there to help us if something goes wrong? I think you probably heard from the presenters that if not done right, composting can be quite dangerous. We agree. We've had hours of conversations with NDEP who share our concerns that this is unnecessary. So changing the definition of composting, as SB 349 does, it highlights just one method of composting. And are we then in some way discouraging community composting if that particular community does not want to use that specific type of composting that's being carved out? So the current definition of composting lives in Nevada code, and that is NAC 444.572. This NAC definition allows for any and all types of composting, not just one. So the concern is by adding this different definition of composting in statute, this could create an unfair and we would argue a needless advantage to that one type of composting. And again, I have to recognize Senators Orenshaw and Dignate and Mr. DeLee, who we have spent hours having this discussion. But if composting is not done right, it can be dangerous, coupled with the fact that we don't have a health district, and if something could go wrong, we put our communities at risk. And finally, defining composting in state law, in NRS, we believe that undercuts the State Environmental Commission's ability to change the composting definition in reg, which then has the effect that the Commission's responsibility, which is to oversee these composting operations and make sure that they're safe, that they're responsible, and they're not creating pollution or nuisances within the community. I'd want to point out we see no issue with the farmers market provisions in this bill. We would support those, but we would oppose the remainder of the sections in SB 349 for the reasons stated that will also be touched on by NDEP. Thank you so much, Chair.
And thank you for joining us. I believe we have a question for Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. And so one of the questions, one of the oppositions that I've heard to this piece of legislation has just been that the use of composting is going to impact the process for trash right now. It's not something you really touched on, but I'm just hoping that you could answer this. Like, how many people does your company serve right now? And do we really expect that many individuals to go from not composting to composting for it to impact the business model?
Chair Flores, through you and to the Vice Chair, Mackenzie Warren, on behalf of CNS Waste Solutions. If I understand your question correctly, Vice Chair, there's nothing that's preventing the community composting. For example, Viva La Compost, who you heard from in the support testimony, they're operating currently. And this is a service that they offer for $35 a month. They can take the goods and turn that around. We, as a company, CNS, do provide some compostable materials to a dairy farm in Amargosa Valley that is the only permitted composting facility that's in our region. So we currently participate in that. As to your question about how many customers we have, I don't have that off the top of my head. Happy to get that information to you following this hearing. And if I missed anything else, please, I tried to unpack it.
Please follow.
Thank you, Chair. And so I guess I'm not quite understanding if this is permissive language, because that's exactly how I read the bill right now. It is permissive language. I'm not understanding what the opposition is because it's not creating those now. So it seems to me that this would help us create that dialogue at the county so that we can have this conversation about compost. I mean, I remember conversations about composting when I was in elementary school and we had a little composter there at the school. So it seems like to me that this has been a conversation that we have been trying to push for the last 20, 25 years. And so I'm just trying to understand what that would be to us opening the dialogue at the county level.
Thank you, Chair Flores, through you and to Vice Chair Mackenzie Warren on behalf of CNS Waste Solutions. So the issue is that even though the language is permissive, SB 349 contains a definition of composting that singles out one type of composting, which directly conflicts with NAC 444.572 that includes all types of composting. So, Vice Chair, the concern is that should, let's say, Nye County decide to engage in community composting, should this bill pass, you're now creating tension between the state's definition and the regulatory definition. And we've seen success in allowing, we don't need enabling language to encourage counties to do this because it's already in their purview and that process already exists for them. And so the concern is really with the definition in state law when it should be addressed at a local level.
Thank you. So I appreciate that. So now my understanding is that the issue is with the definition of compost. So if we make fix the definition of compost or put enabling language to allow for the commission that's creating the regulations for composting now to create that definition, we would be fine with this bill?
Chair Flores, through you and to the Vice Chair, Mackenzie Warren, on behalf of CNS Waste Solutions, without seeing what that enabling language would look like and which definition of composting we would be adopting, I couldn't say at this moment here on the dais whether we could support that. But I will tell you, Vice Chair, that we have spent hours with the experts, which is the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection, who is the regulatory agency charged with keeping Nye County safe. And those state experts say that this is not necessary and creates a tension. So again, without looking at the language and knowing what the amendment could be, I'm just not at liberty to say one way or another, but we will certainly continue to stay at the table in good faith and continue the discussion.
So I certainly hope then if that agency were to create a definition of compost, then we could get you in support of the legislation. Is that correct? That seems to be what I'm hearing. If that agency that oversees the health and safety of the county is okay with it, we would be okay with it.
Chair Flores, through you and to the Vice Chair, Mackenzie Warren, on behalf of CNS Waste Solutions, I wouldn't feel comfortable speaking for NDEP, but I will tell you I've spent hours with them, and that is their concern, the tension. So they'll be joining over the phone in neutral, I believe, so maybe we could ask them.
Thank you, Ms. Warren. I know we have a follow-up as well from Assemblyman Matthews. Please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Warren. Just to make sure I understood clearly a point that you made. I believe you said that one of the results of this narrow definition of composting and the way this would be applied, narrowly and specifically, could actually discourage composting at the local level if that particular method or approved process is not something that is deemed to be workable at the local level. And if that's the case, it would seem to actually undercut what seems to be the intent of this bill. And based on your understanding of the situation locally, which I think is probably greater than that of many of these committee members, is that your assessment? Thank you.
Chair Flores, through you and to the Assemblyman, Mackenzie Warren, on behalf of CNS Waste Solutions, it is. So, enabling language that is confined to a definition that is narrow, the argument could be if that particular community doesn't use that method of composting, then could that dissuade them from going that route? Because they may say, well, we don't, that doesn't work for our soil, or that doesn't work for this region. And so the concern is with this narrow definition.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next, we have Assemblywoman Anderson, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing up the concerns, because I know that sometimes that's not always comfortable to do. I have two questions. The first was, have you proposed an amendment to the sponsor to try to fix this problem? Because I know that on the Senate side, there were some other issues as well. I believe it had to do more with the I believe it was the trash haulers, I think is where some of those problems were coming from. But have you in fact proposed an amendment to the maker so this way this can be fixed? That would be my first question. Then my second question will be for legal, if the chair is open to it.
Chair Flores, through you and to the Assemblywoman Mackenzie Warren, on behalf of CNS Waste Solutions. You're correct. The issues in the Senate side really dealt with the franchise agreement that initially touched the definition of solid waste, which would impact franchise agreements for haulers all over the state. That problem was fixed. through consensus. However, the remaining portions are what we've been working through, having multiple calls with the senators, with Mr. DeLee, with NDEP, with Southern Nevada Health District. And our suggestion would be to keep the farmers market provisions of the bill and engage in the interim, which was offered by NDEP and Southern Nevada Health District, because earlier I'd stated that they're just unaware of anyone applying for a composting permit and getting denied. So is this really a matter of inaccessibility, or what are we trying to fix? And so I think as an industry, we defer to our state experts, and our suggestion was to retain the farmers market and continue the work in the interim with some other solution, because it is not a one-size-fits-all. It's really something that's dealt with at the local level and by regulation. So it's very hard to legislate at a state level for a problem that looks different depending on where you are in the state.
Thank you for that clarification. But follow up, Mr. Chair, I'm so sorry.
And was that a follow-up with the legal?
Actually, it's a separate question for legal, if I may.
Please.
So in your earlier answer, you had stated that there was a disconnect between what is being proposed here and the code. Legal, if you could also weigh in on that belief, that if you could, please. I understand where you're coming from as the lobbyist bringing forward that information, but if we could also get that legal opinion, that would be very helpful.
Erin Sturdivant, Legislative Counsel Bureau. The definition set forth in Section 7.1 is defining composting for the purposes of this specific section. So if a governing body establishes an urban composting zone, composting has the meaning set forth in subsection 4. The solid waste chapter of NAC and sanitation defines composting differently for the purposes of those regulations, but the definition set forth in 7.1 wouldn't apply to the NAC provisions. It doesn't overrule it. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that clarification, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me that time.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Members, any additional questions? Assemblyman Ellison, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just got one concern. If this grows the way it is, it'd probably hit most restaurants asking for product, lettuce, celery, whatever. By doing so, don't you think that this would create a problem and a nuisance and a problem trying to collect all this waste at the restaurants and stores and stuff like this? Not only would it create a problem and a waste, it would create a smell and a separate dumping area. But would that not fall into this, or are we just looking at farmer markets and personal? So could you or somebody else answer that question?
Chair Flores, through you and to the Assemblyman Mackenzie Warren on behalf of CNS Waste Solutions. We're not in the restaurant business. We're in the trash hauling and recycling business. So I wouldn't be able to answer that. Thank you.
Please follow up.
But wouldn't that still create a problem, with the sanitation department? Because it'd be different bins, and I don't know, they still use the compost that they use at the landfill to help use it as fill, do they not?
Chair Flores, through you and to the Assemblyman Mackenzie Warren on behalf of CNS Waste Solutions. So if I understand your question correctly, yes, there is a concern with compostable materials, because if not stored properly, they can be dangerous. And so our concern for CNS really exists with the fact that we don't have the same guardrails that more populous areas of the state have, because we do not have a health district such as Southern Nevada Health District, and the regulatory agency that is supposed to keep us safe is NDEP. And so the guardrails of understanding how long the material can stay and to what amount and the frequency that it's moved is definitely important to the conversation, but it would probably be something that is decided at a local level should various counties and cities decide to move forward with a composting plan.
Thank you. And Assemblyman Ellison, I'm sure that those speaking in support, when the senator comes back up, he can talk about how that's managed and done in other states. And I think that'd be a good reference to see what could potentially be the case here in Nevada. Thank you, Ms. Warren. I appreciate the dialogue today, and thank you for preemptively reaching out to a lot of us and working to express some of those concerns. Thank you. We'll continue with those wishing to speak in opposition to Senate Bill 349. I see Ms. Duarte. Welcome, whenever you're ready.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Edith Duarte, EDITH, DUARTE, Strategies 360 today, representing Republic Services. We share the same concerns, many of the same concerns that Ms. Warren just mentioned, and we have been working with NDP, with the sponsor, with Mr. Doñate, and with the Southern Nevada Health District. Again, Southern Nevada Health District actually hasn't seen an application come through in a couple of years. It's my understanding that this doesn't stop them from, stop any company from trying to compost commercially at this point. I also really want to thank Tara Pike for her comments regarding some recycling that we do with UNLV. We also do partner with a pig farm in Las Vegas currently, so we're already working on trying to eliminate food waste from casinos. We also do have a methane gas to energy plant at our landfill, and that does power over 10,000 homes in Southern Nevada. So we are, trying to partner and be good partners with the community. We just don't really think that this, currently, the definition is not necessary because it is broader. And I know legal did clarify some of that portion. Some of the other things that were brought up during the hearing, Ms. Pike mentioned curbside composting. I do want to just let you know that would cause a rate increase because it would be hard to figure out who is composting, who is not. So there would likely be a rate increase, at least Republic Services would have to look into that. To Mr. Ellison's point as well, we do worry about some of the things that you've mentioned, contamination, smells, and of course where these composting centers would be located.
Thank you, Ms. Duarte. I don't believe we have any questions for you. I think Ms. Warren took all those questions early on. The benefit of going first. I don't believe we have anybody else in opposition here in the room. At this time, we'll go to the phone lines. Broadcast, please.
To testify in opposition to Senate Bill 349, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Understood. Thank you. At this time, we'll go to those wishing to testify in the neutral position on Senate Bill 349. We don't have anybody present. If we could go back to the phone lines. Broadcast, please.
To testify in the neutral position on Senate Bill 349, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 843, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You may begin.
Hello, my name is Greg Lovato, G-R-E-G, L-O-V as in Victor, A-T-O. I'm the administrator of the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection. Good morning, Chair Flores, members of the committee. I'm the administrator of NDEP. I'm testifying neutral on SB 349. NDEP appreciates the goals of the bill to increase reuse of food scraps and decrease the amount that end up in landfills, which can contribute to statewide greenhouse gas emissions. These align well with the overall goals of the NDEP Sustainable Materials Management Program and the state climate strategy. Under NRS 444 and 444A, NDEP administers the solid waste management and recycling program statewide, along with our partner agencies, the Southern Nevada and Washoe County Health Districts, who serve as the solid waste management authorities for their jurisdictions. One of our primary objectives is to encourage and allow material reuse, such as composting, while making sure material is handled responsibly through appropriate regulation and permitting. In brief, it is NDEP's view that there are no regulatory or statutory barriers in place that currently prevent community composting from occurring, and that only referring to a specific type of composting in statute is not necessary and could have unintended consequences. The current definition of composting in NAC 444.572 allows for any type of composting, including the one proposed in statute by SB 349, and already sets a level playing field. Because the proposed legislation only refers to one specific type of composting and end use for composted material, and although it does not overrule the definition in NAC, reference to one type of composting may have the inadvertent effect of limiting how communities are able to compost and how to utilize the resulting compost. This can prevent communities from implementing composting programs where these narrow parameters may not be the best fit for their local environmental conditions or community needs. Also, defining composting in statute limits the ability of the State Environmental Commission to modify the composting definition and regulation in the future to encourage composting or to make sure that composting operations are operated responsibly and don't create a pollution or nuisance concern as part of the process or in the accumulation of compostable materials. Let me be clear. NDEP is willing to engage in conversation with our regulatory partners at the health districts and all stakeholders. We're willing to review best practices and lessons learned from our co-regulators in other states, to revisit and revise regulations, or alternatively, to pursue technical assistance or other incentives needed to encourage and remove any barriers to composting in Nevada. Our staff has discussed these concerns with the Southern Nevada Health District, and they share these. That concludes my testimony. I will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us this morning. We do have a question for you, Madam Vice Chair, please.
Thank you, Chair, Mr. Lovato, and thank you, Mr. Lovato, for joining us in the Government Affairs Committee. Obviously, throughout today's hearing, we heard just some disagreement about perhaps the opposition to the definition of composting, and I'm just wondering if you could send over a definition perhaps that the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection would feel would be more appropriate for that.
Thank you, Vice Chair Torres. Greg Lovato for the record. I would just refer everyone to the existing definition of composting in Nevada Administrative Code 444.572, and I don't think we need to define it in statute.
Understood. Members, any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you again for joining us in the neutral position. And at this time, broadcast will go to the next caller wishing to testify in the neutral position.
Caller with the last three digits of 530. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You may begin.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Teresa Hayes, TERESA HAYES. I am the Environmental Health Program Manager for the Nevada Division of Public and Behavioral Health. I am happy to answer any questions you may have this morning in regards to this bill.
Thank you. Members, any questions? I don't believe we have any questions for you. Thank you for joining us this morning. Next caller wishing to testify in the neutral position, Senate Bill 349.
Sure. There are no callers in the neutral position at this time.
Thank you. At this time, we'll come back to Senator Orenshaw for any closing remarks you may have.
Chair Flores, members of the Committee on Government Affairs, James Orenshaw, State Senate 21. Thank you for spending the morning talking trash with me. And the point is, I don't think these are trash. And I think that there's a lot more. I'm scared. I would try at Assemblyman Dickman, but I'm just scared. I know, yeah. A lot of good can come out of food waste for our communities in urban gardens, for our agriculturists, our farmers. Many parts of the state, I know my part of the state has very challenging soil where, as we heard Dr. O'Callahan speak, trying to have a little neighborhood garden or community garden is very, very difficult. I think, we've heard that this bill is enabling language. It doesn't force any county or city to do anything. However, if they'd like to try to set up a composting program with community composting, they would be able to. We've heard that the definition here in the bill, which I pursued because I believed it had the least consequences to neighbors in terms of odor or bugs, rodents, anything like that, does not override the definition of composting in the Nevada Administrative Code. And I don't believe it would change anything in terms of people wanting to compost with other methods that are not the Bokachi method. So I do appreciate your time, and I hope the committee would think about this bill. And if I could give, maybe Mr. DeLee might have a minute or two to jump in with your permission, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Flores. I really don't think I can add to anything today. It's been a great presentation. I appreciate the opportunity. And it's a lot of people, oddly enough, on both sides of this bill think it doesn't go far enough. And I agree, but we got to start somewhere. So thank you.
And thank you again, Senator Orenshaw, and to Senator Doñate. I know you've been working thoroughly and for long hours with the opposition, and hopefully we can continue to work together and find a little bit more middle ground. I know you've moved very far away from where you started, but I appreciate the hard work. So with that, we'll go ahead and close out the hearing on Senate Bill 349. And next, we'll invite those wishing to testify or join us for public comment. I want to remind you that this is not a time to reopen the hearing. This is a time for you to speak about general matters that fall within the purview of this committee. We don't have anybody in person wishing to join us for public comment, so we'll go to the phone lines. Broadcast, please.
To take place in the public comment queue, please press star 9 now. Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
Thank you. Members, for tomorrow, we'll be meeting at 9 in the morning. We have a rather voluminous work session document. Please give yourself an opportunity to go through all those bills. More importantly, if you could please give me a heads up on anything you will not be supporting. I don't want to bring anybody into this room only to see their bill die and embarrass them in that way. So out of respect, if you could just give me a heads up. If there's bills you do not like, that's fine. You don't have to support anything, but I just don't want to bring anybody in here, make a senator run out of a meeting, make their way up into the committee room, and then we tell them that their bill's dead. So out of respect, if you could just give me a heads up. With that, members, thank you for all the work. I will not be adding anything to the work session document, but based on your feedback, I may be removing things from the work session document. So there won't be any surprises about anything that's on there. That's the most we'll see, but we may have to remove things if we don't have the votes. With that, this meeting's adjourned.